get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back and wait and allow ourselves and each other to lose control.
Hey, thank you, Kev Mo. And hello, friends and neighbors, sisters and brothers, all you citizens of the world. We're here with you for another edition of Heartland at Home. This one's for the week of February 20th. And we are so glad to welcome an old pal, Chicago expat, all the way from Hawaii, Mike McGraw, AKA Michael Piranha. We're also going to talk with veteran organizer and educator and author Maureen Helwig. And we're looking forward to having some great conversation. We're glad you joined us. But first, Katie, would you share with us something good that has happened to you during this time in the pandemic?
Well, we do this every week. So this week, the good thing that happened, was a baby, a new Hogan baby. A little boy named Connell has come into the world just overnight, and I'm thrilled.
Congratulations.
Yes. Tom, how about yourself? What good thing happened to you this week or that's going on for you?
I'm working on my first roux for a vegetable-rich Lenten crawfish and shrimp gumbo that I hope, turns out nice this weekend. We still are going to have to be warming up from all the snow we've been having, but I'm looking forward to some really different kind of cooking. Michael, what are you enjoying during this snowy pandemic time?
Well, I love the snow. I love looking out the window. I like shoveling it. But I got to say, the height of my week was on Thursday morning when I got shot numero dos. So I've had my 2 pandemic shots. And while I had to cancel all my travel, in a few weeks, we'll see if I can at least take a ride to maybe to Wisconsin.
I'm predicting you could go to the South Side.
I'll drive down there again.
Well, our new administration is promising that everyone's going to have at least one shot by July. And you know what? I have some confidence they might get close to that after weeks of waiting for those of us who are eligible for the first or second round. Very exciting. And of course, the positivity rate is way down, although I think we ought to be looking at the per capita, both infection and injection rates as a more realistic thing, but we're still learning as we're going here, right?
We are learning as
normal.
I'm sorry, Tom. I think what I've liked this week, again, we cover something every week that is a good result of the pandemic, something that will allow us to say, let's not return to normal, let's do this instead. I like teams of snow shovelers going out and tackling the alleys, which no one else does. And if we don't tackle the alleys, the garbage doesn't pick up. So I've seen there are numerous organized efforts like through our alderman's offices, but there's also, which really does my heart good, block clubs who just say, okay, 5 o'clock, everybody out there with your shovels. That's the way to do it, neighbors.
And there's just been basic good neighborliness. I mean, I found a neighbor who I didn't know had a snowblower, but God bless him, he was out helping not just himself, but neighbors on either side. It's really nice since we aren't used to this much snow in recent years in our Chicago winters. It was a reminder that we are in this particular climate. And as Texas found out this week, we need to be more ready for these kind of superstorms, I guess. But I'm feeling like maybe we can, as Michael referenced, begin to think about travel beyond the neighborhood sometime later this summer, or at least by fall, which really is pretty exciting. But please, folks, even as we're beginning to get our shots, wear your mask, consider doubling up when you go outside. Michael, what do you think about that effort here in the 49th Ward last weekend?
Well, I love the 49th Ward, and 49th Ward, there's been a lot of outreach to seniors. We saw 400 neighbors get their shots through Howard Brown. It was all set up at Loyola Park Fieldhouse. Alderman Haddon hopes to repeat that again soon as the supplies become available. Looking forward to more shots for more people, not only in the 49th, but beyond.
One of the things that I kind of love about going through this past year is how how much an international consciousness has been foisted on my neighbor, fellow Americans, who do not naturally think about the others in the world. So I would like us to just look at the example of the nation of France, who has just decided maybe a week or so ago to reward the frontline workers who are not already citizenship in recognition for their sacrifice and work and service in this time of crisis. What a concept, huh?
What a response. What a communitarian response.
I love
Just updating other public movements going on around the world. There was an effort by the Indian government to help agribusiness, and local family farmers are up in arms. It's a movement being led by women now. They're being charged with sedition by the government for passing out toolkits on how to organize against these new regs that will really be devastating to small family farmers. And over in Myanmar, what's happening there, Michael?
Over there in Myanmar, used to be called Burma, the protests continue. They are expanding. The COVID services have been disrupted for fear of by the public of the military. The military is getting a lot of pressure from around the world, from other governments, and we will see. But the people have not been deterred. They are in the streets every day, all the time. Keep your eyes open, pay attention.
Yeah, you know, and the military, by the way, in their last election only won about 33 of the 400 plus seats in their parliament or whatever version of that they have. So they are really under pressure, and God love the Myanmar public. May they stay strong. I noticed a little while ago, and I really applaud this move on the part of the new administration, that the US reopened an ACA sign-up period. That's the Affordable Care Act, and February is not a normal time for sign-up, but because we now have an administration that recognizes a crisis when they see it and reacts, they're going to allow, you know, this has a potential for, you know, putting 20 to 30 million people back on insurance rolls. Good move, Biden administration.
You also noticed something else. What did you think about?
All right. Let me just say, Senator Ted Cruz, don't let anybody tell you he's not on the job. He's gone to Cancun in search of heat for his constituents. And all of a sudden, Mexico wants a wall. No,
meanwhile,
it's
thousands
not
of volunteers, or hundreds of volunteers, began rescuing thousands of frozen endangered sea turtles in Texas. As you've been reading, they've had a little weather problem down there. Katie, you found this a curious development given the other things going on in the state right now with their grid and all that. But pretty fascinating that this effort would be undertaken.
You know,
I just think it's the best kind of reciprocal restoration effort. Humankind's helping other species. Unfortunately, I saw that story and was blissed out about it right before I saw the story of freezing actual Texans.
Yeah.
I don't hear, at least from one of the governor, that guy named Boyd, I guess he got kicked out after writing his little screed about, don't talk to me about heat, lift yourself up by your bootstraps or something. Anyway, that guy got canned. That was quickly handled.
Yeah.
So Texans, God, we feel for you. We understand cold. I know, we know you don't, and how serious it is when you don't.
You know, given what's going on in Texas, which is certainly a tragedy, but it raises the question, how is Illinois' power grid? We have a lot of reliance on aging nuke plants and backroom ComEd deals. So this is something we're going to take a look at, and we'll bring you some more information as we have it, because we want to know how our state is prepared for even greater snowfalls.
Isn't it funny how, as we get closer to home, we talk about backroom deals? I mean, speaking of backroom deals, this week, Mike Madigan resigned. So that means another empty seat that some committee people are going to get to fill. We'll keep an eye on that story going forward as well.
One other guy we've been watching in the midst of trying to cover police reform is the current head of the Fraternal Order of Police. Guess what happened to him? He ain't getting a paycheck because of prior racist and other untoward comments that he's made as even before he became FOP head, but he's been even more outrageous since he's been head of this police lodge. They're not quite a union, but we'll see how the head of the FOP survives this particular one. In the meantime, very important hearings going on in the city council about the ongoing efforts to try to catch up on the federally mandated consent decree to try to clean up our police department and actually begin working on true public safety initiatives.
And that's called CPAC. And anybody listening to this who is not in Maria Haddon's ward, who's already on the right side of it, please talk to your alderman about saying yes to CPAC. That's the
there was this absolutely mind-blowing report this week about how much money from the stimulus package went to the cops rather than to public health. So folks, we got to wake up, pay attention to this. Rebudgeting public safety priorities is what we're talking about here, to programs that make sense and work, as opposed to returning to normal, which has not been working.
You know, we have a real serious hunger strike going on in town. Tom, why don't you fill us in on that?
Well, United Working Families picked up on the hunger strikers in the 10th Ward who are trying to stop a scrap metal plant that's being relocated from the TIF-infused Lincoln Park to the already environmentally challenged southeast side. This is an issue that's beginning to heat up as the federal government looks at how the zoning and regulatory process of both the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago might have led to an environmentally challenged neighborhood getting yet another challenging development in their hood.
Remember how they used to call it sacrificial grounds out on the res in the western states? Well, that's the sacrificial grounds here in Southeast Side. God bless it. And being joined this week by the kids at George Washington High School for a one-day fast in solidarity with their parents. My heart beats.
This is an incredible organizing effort that's really taking off, and we need to be supporting these folks. We need to relook at these kind of decisions and figure out the best way to deal with our scrap.
So with that said, it's time for our first guest, who we are going to welcome in with a little bit of Peter, Paul, and Mary.
Take it away, Big Blue Frog.
The neighbors are against it, and it's clear to me, and it's probably clear to you. They think value on their property will go right down if the family next door is blue. Well, I'm in love with a big blue frog. A big blue frog loves me. I've got it tattooed on my chest. It says P-H-R-O-G. It's frog to me.
Now we welcome a great friend, Maureen Helwig, a researcher and organizer and the author of a book that came out over the past year, A Neighbor Amongst Neighbors, Erie Neighborhood House, 150 Years as a Home with No Borders. What a great title, Maureen, and what a more appropriate way to frame this incredible saga of a settlement house in a city like Chicago, probably better known for its Hull House and other settlement houses, but Hull House is a museum. Erie Neighborhood House is still a building with functioning programs.
Alive and well.
How did you decide to pick up on the biography, if you will, of Erie Neighborhood House?
Well, I realized at one point after I retired from there in 2014 that as it was approaching its 150th anniversary in 2020, that I had been around in one form or another for about 50 of those 150 years as a volunteer, a board member, and on the staff twice, once in the 90s and again just before I retired. So I thought if anyone was going to write this story, probably should be me. Because, you know, when you're around for 50 years, that means you're really in touch with people from just the previous 50 years to that, who were still around when I first got in touch with Erie House back in 1968. I came to Westtown to teach school, and found that our school was from the back, just across from the back door of Erie Neighborhood House. So, so let me go from there. And, you know, basically, this is not just a story of a settlement house, but it's a Chicago story.
Yeah.
And, you know, how many organizations have a view of the city from the same address for 150 years? And so they saw the city, you know, pass by their doors, and some of it come in their doors over that 150-year period. And I had always been a fan of Jane Addams. I worked not only, I actually did work for Hull House at the Uptown Center back in the 1970s, and I worked there twice. So settlement houses have been part of my life for sure. And I learned to be a great fan of Jane Addams. And my view that I wanted to put across in this book is that the settlement house movement, besides coming from through the leadership of a great woman like Jane Addams, was in fact a faith-based movement, not necessarily church-based, although there were churches involved, and nor was it really religious, but rather, as Eleanor Stebner says in her book, which I would recommend, The Women of Hull House, that it was a study in spirituality, vocation, and friendship. And I think that says, you know, what Erie House was about. And while Jane Addams came on the scene in 1889, I thought it was important to write something about organizations that, in a sense, in Erie House came before and after Jane, how they were influenced by her, but in the case of Erie House, really predated her. So the Erie House story begins in 1870. And when I sat down and thought about that, I realized Ulysses Grant was still president of the United States when Erie House started. And the city was really only about 33 years old. You know, its first, passing or coming to the end of its first generation. And it started on Erie Street, really just, you could walk to downtown from Erie Street if you're a good walker. And it was only a couple miles north of where Hull House would eventually come to rest. But really 19 years before Jane Addams started her impactful work, Erie House was doing that work insofar as it was welcoming immigrants. It was not denigrating them as foreigners, but rather celebrating the culture that they brought to the city. And it was also a parallel to a lot of Hull House work in the sense that it began by embracing the children of the neighborhood. This started as a Sunday school, and Holland Presbyterian Church that ran this Sunday school boasted it was the largest Sunday school in Chicago at that time. But it wasn't long before the lay people of the church, and this is an important part of the story, is that yes, there were ministers involved in the Erie story, but the lay people were huge. That, you know, the church is not just about the ordained people. It's about the people who fill the pews and go out and do the work. So they began to move away from the Sunday school concept, from the notion of religious teaching, to realize that the mission had to be much broader than religion. And so by 1915, the church folk established what they called the Erie Chapel Institute on Erie Street. At that time, the address was 312 West Erie Street. And later, as the address system in Chicago changed, it moved from 312 Erie to 1347 West Erie, which is where the current Erie House is located. And that's the address on the door.
Maureen.
Yes.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Clearly, Erie House has really been about feeding both the mind and the body over its many years in operation. I'd like to ask you, how has the scope of services offered by Erie House changed over the decades? And what is the primary need today?
The primary need besides, feeding the hungry is feeding them knowledge. Erie House has always been more about education than it has been about social work. Over time, there have been really only a handful of social workers, but many, many educators. And the programs reflect that, beginning from working with preschoolers, after school programming, where the kids come to Erie House after the school day, youth programming, keeping kids off the street, reinforcing the importance of being successful in school, on through adult education, teaching English, preparing people for citizenship. These are the programs that Erie House started offering when it was Erie Chapel Institute in 1915. And I think that there were, at that time, in the earliest days, the immigrants who came to Erie House, believe it or not, were the Dutch and the Norwegians. And again, neither of these were Presbyterian. And over time, that became more and more the point. It was not about creating new Presbyterians, it was about making new neighbors. And eventually the Dutch and the Norwegians moved on. The Norwegians stayed fairly close, moving over to Humboldt Park and Logan Square, and established even a Norwegian American Hospital, which just last month, after 125 years as Norwegian American Hospital, the CEO, Jose Sanchez, announced it would henceforth be called Humboldt Park Healthcare. So, but it took 125 before that Norwegian name faded. After the Norwegians and the Dutch, then the immigrants that followed were the Poles and the Italians. And we know that the Polish immigrants came to Chicago in huge numbers, to the point of which Chicago was known to have more Poles than Warsaw. Yeah. And many of them settled near Erie House. They belonged to churches like Holy Innocents. And then next to them were the Italians, which in fact, when they first came to the United States and the Erie neighborhood in the late 1800s, there was no Italy. They were really from various towns in what later became Italy when the Risorgimento actually took place. The Italians in particular loved Erie House. Some of them even changed over from Catholicism to Presbyterianism and went to services at Erie Chapel. The Poles, not so much. They stayed Catholic. But this was the beginning of the Protestant Presbyterian Church's service to another 100 years of Catholics. And again, that was not the point. It was not about religion. It was about neighboring.
Maureen, when the two of us first met professionally, it was at the very beginnings of the Chicago Rehab Network, literally under a stairwell, mini library at Erie Neighborhood House. Can you talk a little bit about the development trends around this social service settlement house?
And I have to say, a lot of things happened under stairways at Erie House. Not only the Rehab Network, but Erie Family Health Center, Bickerdike, and lots of other
I think computer training started that way in later years.
Yes, anyway. I'm sure it did. Erie was always about using every space available. And even the chapel during the week was not a chapel, it was used for other things. Miss Florence used to say when the women's auxiliary met in the chapel room that we pray here and spill coffee here. And that kind of summarizes how the space was used at Erie House. So if I can back up before we get to the Rehab Network to maybe tell you the Bickerdike story. So in 1967, the neighborhood had been under siege already from urban renewal. The wrecking ball swung around the Erie neighborhood many times over the years, as the concept back in those days of urban planning was, if there's 3 vacant lots on the block, we might as well tear down the rest of the block and build something new, like a Ramada Inn or whatever. And so the fact that the wrecking ball did not hit in that way is due to Erie House and an organization that Erie House helped form, which was called the Northwest Community Organization. NCO started in 1962. It was part of the Saul Alinsky movement for community-based control of neighborhoods to avoid things like wrecking balls rolling in and someone outside the neighborhood making decisions for what should happen there. And so NCO, Holy Innocents Church and Erie House, if you look at all the early photos of NCO congresses and meetings, the leadership was provided by Reverend Lyman of Erie House and Father Janiak at Holy Innocents. They're all over the place. And so they helped to keep NCO going. Erie House paid for NCO organizers. And the interesting thing about NCO was that while it started out based on the Alinsky model of engaging Catholic churches, and some of you knew Monsignor Jack Egan, who was involved in that process. He helped get NCO started by going to the Catholic churches. But over time, some of the Catholic churches backed off. And the organizations that stepped in to pick up the slack were the Protestant settlement houses. Erie House, Onward House, Association House, all of those organizations paid for NCO organizers to do the job.
Maureen,
Mhm.
we're not going to let you outline the entire book.
Got it.
Because we want someone to go out and buy it at the end of this.
I hope so.
The book that that Maureen is talking about is her book called A Neighbor Amongst Neighbors, Erie Neighborhood House, 150 Years as a Home with No Borders. And despite the fact that she's talking like it, Maureen was only there for 50 of those 100 years.
150.
Look, over the decades, Maureen, your valuable experience with both academe, if I may say so, and community, what is the most important way forward with those two in relationship, if it can happen, now that we've got all these big empty plants all over the city where education used to happen, and now it's just for the students who have nowhere to go, usually the international students. How can we better put the town and gown right here in Chicago together to better community, the way you did with the Chicago Studies program?
Yeah, well, which no longer exists, but yeah. Academia has its moments when it gets it, and then sometimes it has its moment where it forgets what it got. I think that, to me, all of my academic work really followed from my community work. I decided to pursue a master's degree in urban planning because it fit as a complement to community organizing. If you're they didn't have a master's degree in community organizing exactly, so urban planning was the closest. And I would say that UIC in the late 70s and the School of Urban Planning was very oriented to the neighborhoods of the city. And in the classes I was in, we were all older people who had been out doing the work before we came for our graduate degrees.
Was that MUP? Did you attend MUP?
That was MUP, yes.
Say what that is.
Masters in Urban Planning and Public Affairs.
Yeah.
And, the faculty there were very attuned to the fact that the students in front of them had more experience than they did in some areas. And they appreciated that. They didn't denigrate it. They would say, in a class, well, Maureen, I know you did this kind of work, would you share that with the class? So it was the right program for me, and allowed me to use my experience and add to that the academic disciplines and research that expanded what I learned on the street. But to me, research always needs to be grounded in reality and used to improve on that.
Can I ask you this? With Chicago, we were born into was a very Catholic town. And while you have referred to the Protestants and Catholics getting along in the settlement biz,
We get along.
that's true. While generally diminished, but in real estate alone, it's still a formidable player in our town. First of all, do you still call yourself a practicing Catholic? May I ask?
Only as Catholicism is practiced at Old St. Pat's in the West Loop.
Okay.
It took me a while to find a church in
Sure.
the Catholic, sector that fit what I believe Christianity needed to be. And I'm happy to say that in my experience over the last 20 years, Old St. Pat's fits that, and their new vision statement, says the three principles are radical inclusivity, exquisite worship, and transformative kinship. Now, Those three
Maureen?
principles, if those are connected with Catholicism, then I'm a Catholic.
Maureen, let me go back to Westtown and ask you, are there any working class households left there? And what and who is organizing the community these days?
Yeah. There are some. There are certainly, I mean, I know people who still live in the neighborhood who've held on, but mostly the area immediately around Erie House has been gentrified. But, you know, it took a lot longer for that to happen because Erie Neighborhood House and NCO were there. They made it a much more gradual, slower process and did it without the wrecking ball first tearing everything down and then gentrifying it. And, you know, the thing that first, ironically, you know, the thing that first attracted the gentry to the neighborhood were the wonderful old Victorian buildings that still stood, the ones the urban renewal would have torn down. So I always say, you know, that the yuppies and the gentry, you know, that they never wrote a thank you note to the community before them for saving the neighborhood where they are now prospering.
What I found curious in getting ready for this conversation, Maureen, was realizing how few people would know today what we meant if we said Westtown. How many different names have been attached to the, say, Palmer Square micro neighborhood that you've lived in yourself? I mean, is it South Wicker Park, East Humboldt Park, West?
Yeah, I mean, but those
West Lincoln Park? I mean, who would have thought the 606 would become the marker for what the Erie Neighborhood House neighborhood is becoming?
Well, you know, I mean, it's been Westtown, I think, since the 1930s. And, you know, gradually people got used to thinking of the larger area that way. But within what the community areas map calls Westtown are all these smaller enclaves, most of which got their names from the real estate industry. You know, I remember walking out of my house when I lived on Chestnut Street one day, and here was this little sign that said East Village. I thought, where did that come from? Well, because East Ukrainian Village, or Ukrainian Village rather, existed first. So since we were east of that, we became East Ukrainian Village. But that was too long to put on a little sign, so they just dropped the Ukrainian part and called it East Village. Not to mention the fact that it sounded kind of like, you know, New York, you know, the village. You know, so that's where those names came from. I mean, Wicker Park was Wicker Park way back in the 60s. There was one of the organizations that belonged to NCO was called the Wicker Park Neighborhood Council. Yeah. But as I share with people, you know, back in the 70s, when we went to meetings in Wicker Park, usually at Josephinum High School, in the evening, you know, as we left the meeting, people would ask me, do you have someone to walk you to your car? You know, because Wicker Park was much tougher than the area where I lived, East Village, in those days. And now, of course, Wicker Park has, you know, surpassed it. But it was also, you know, Wicker Park, even though it wasn't called it then, was a destination for the immigrant groups as they prospered. So first the Norwegians sort of headed up Milwaukee Avenue and then further west into Humboldt Park. And then the Germans went that way and the Poles, and they built Wicker Park west of what was the Erie neighborhood.
If you want to get a good sense of the history of immigrant and refugee groups moving through Chicago, read Maureen Helwig's history of Erie Neighborhood House. It's very detailed, wonderful series of stories. It's almost kind of like her memoir. Thank you so much for sharing this research with us. A phenomenal story of a truly important neighborhood institution. Maureen Helwig, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Nice to meet you.
Again, it's called Neighbor Amongst Neighbors. The history of Erie Neighborhood House. Thank you, everyone.
Be well, stay safe.
Okay.
Is that a ghost in the sunset? Is that a cry in the wind? Is that a tear in a rainbow? Is paradise caving in? When it all got heavy, she wouldn't worry the load. She put a key in her pocket, she took it up Diamond Head Road. She ran like a river, she ran like the wind. She ran fighting like a devil with a saint closing in. Yeah, girl, run for salvation, run from your sins. Take it up, Diamond Head Road.
All right. I'm so happy to see Michael Piranha in this crazy screen of ours. I'm so happy to have you here all the way from Hawaii.
Aloha, aloha nui loa.
Are you on the Big Island? Is that the Big Island?
I am not. I started out there when I moved
Okay.
here, but I am not on Hawaii anymore. I'm in Oahu,
Nice.
in the
Nice.
burgeoning metropolis of Honolulu.
Well, I was introduced to you by my business partner, who is on the other part of this screen here many, many moons ago. And I always looked at you two as some wonderful friends. And so what I'd like to hear from both of you in intervals, maybe. What's the origin story of your friendship, if I may ask? Michael Piranha, you get to start.
I was just getting close to the draft lottery age. I was out of Kelly High School for 1 year, and my best friend was still in Kelly High School. He was the student council president. His name was Mick DeMicas, and he told me he had met a guy named Michael Begane, who introduced him to Michael James. And there was an organization called Rising Up Angry that was looking around our neighborhood for working class men and women, boys and girls, to participate in some political activism. And I met, actually, Michael came down to the basement where my and Mick's band, Killing Floor, rehearsed. So I was already out of school. And when Nixon mined the harbors in Cambodia, Rising Up Angry staged organized the walkout of the high school. And I was already out of school, but I was there and watched it. I didn't want to get conked, and I couldn't go back into school. But that whole activity around RUA got me attracted to it. And then and Michael and I just started kind of hanging out, you know, and he sucked me into his evil web of bigger worldly thinking.
Michael, what do you remember of those times?
What I remember most is that Rising Up Angry started to put on people's dances. And we had one at Mo Ming, which was a dance studio over on, I think, Seminary, not too far from Belmont. And Killing Floor was one of the bands. That's all I really remember, you know, except I would then follow Killing Floor around. When it became the Piranha Brothers, I went to shows. Mike was one of the people involved in Rising Up Angry's cooperative energy supply, which put on dances and invited people from many neighborhoods to get together, big time parties at the Midland Hotel. And then later, when Michael, he tried to sell me a vehicle, which I didn't buy, but he ended up working at the Heartland. And we had a lot of good times. And every time he comes back to this big island, Turtle Island, we hang out. And I was supposed to be out there with him for a couple of weeks, but as you know, we had to cancel that trip because of COVID. But now that I got my second shot, who knows how long I'll wait before I go to Hawaii.
Mike, can you tell us a little,
Sorry, Tom.
can you tell us a little bit about your musical influences? What kind of Hawaiian music are you playing?
I'm the rock and roll token member of the music Ohana family on this island. I brought I never betray my roots. I have one of the world's greatest Hawaiian slack key guitar players as my bandmate. So if you listen to the new album, if you listen to Diamond Head Road, you'll hear the exotic sounding acoustic guitar is Stephen Inglis. He's a slack key player. He's a Haole boy. He's a Caucasian boy born and raised here, speaks Hawaiian fluently, and is actually one of the top 5 slack key players in the world. Loudon Guitars sponsors him. They fly him to Ireland to throw guitars at him. And he comes back here. He does the NAMM convention. He's sponsored by Loudon. And Stephen and I have been together 14 years now. And that's the flavor I give. But I grew up on the South Side listening to blues. When Michael spoke of that cooperative energy supply gig, Jimmy Fast Fingers Dawkins was the first guy we featured, and
I
his
got a
bass
photograph of you and Jimmy Dawkins.
player got drunk and forgot to show up, and you said, McGraw, go get your bass. I mean, so that's what I do. I play rock and roll for people here, and I'm known as the rock guy on this island. It's all the younger guys playing rock are like, is this chord right? And I'm like, no, go.
Michael James brought the story up as far as you, Mike Piranha McGraw, making it to the Heartland and starting to sling drinks behind the Buffalo Bar, which brought you into my world. Although I had already been a pretty good groupie for the Piranha Brothers, I remember dancing my tush off at was it West End on Hermitage?
Oh yeah, the West End.
Oh, the West End, yeah.
No.
The West End was great. Sue Miller ran the West End.
That's
And
right.
then she opened Lounge Acts, and then she married Jeff Tweedy. So she was done slinging drinks.
Yes,
After
right.
that, she was wonderful. Yeah.
But one of the times, at one point, you guys, despite the fact that you are a South Sider like me, somehow became a Cubs fan. Who knew? Anyway, there was going to be a moment, and I had to be there for you. The Piranha Brothers were actually asked to sing the anthem at a Cubs game. So, despite the fact that I am a Sox fan, I was a Piranha Brothers fan. So I went to the game, witnessed you singing it, applauded wildly with everyone else, and then left because, I don't care about the Cubs. Went out to Clark Street to wait to get picked up on my way somewhere else. And while I was out there, didn't a foul ball come out over the stand right into Clark Street, 10 feet from me? About a half a dozen of us look at each other and at the ball, and I go, well, okay, and I'm gonna go get it. And I did. And I later handed it to you guys at a gig and had you all sign it.
Well, obviously, because the Cubs knew you were a Sox fan, they were aiming for you, but that was typical Cubs in '86. They missed you by 10 feet.
Exactly.
Hey, Mike, tell us about what else happened that very day, because I've got some baseball notables and some band members had a little interaction.
First of all, I grew up on 35th Street and West. That was my house on third floor, 3 flat, and I could see Comiskey from my house. But we moved to Chicago from Pittsburgh when I was 10, and I had gone to Forbes Field to watch the Cubs play the Pirates. So whenever the Pirates would come to Chicago, I'd take the 49 bus up, get on the Addison bus, and go see the Pirates play the Cubs. But they only played them 9 times a year. So I became a Cubs fan living on 35th Street near Comiskey. So I got beat up. And that happened. So, always wanted to sing at a Cubs game. We were sponsored by Budweiser at that point. We were about to be signed to MCA Records, and they booked us in to sing the anthem. And as I was saying before to Michael on an earlier phone call, Harry Carey and Steve Stone were still broadcasting, and Harry was gassed. I mean, Harry was, come on, he was a quart of warm Tanqueray in the booth every game. We know this. And when it was in the copy to introduce us as the Piranha Brothers, the H after the N in the name, it threw Harry at that point, and he was trying to introduce us. We're standing down there, and he said, well, Steve, right now we're going to have these fine young men are going to sing the national anthem. So I thought that was our cue. And if you hear the audio, you can hear Tom count off twice, because we're looking at each other going, I went, 1, 2, and I went, go. And he went, 1, 2, 3. And then we started singing it. So we got through it. We sang a nice 5-part harmony. And the Cubs dropped a doubleheader. It was a continuance of the game the day before. They went 17 innings with Houston, and then they lost that game, and then they lost the next game. So, I mean, they probably threw that ball at Katy for leaving because there was 41 people at that game.
What about Yogi Berra? Tell us the Yogi Berra part.
Oh, yeah. Yogi Berra was he was the hitting coach, I believe, I might have this backwards. Billy Williams was the first base coach, I think, at that point, or the hitting coach of the Cubs. And Yogi Berra was the other thing. He was either first base coach for the Astros or hitting coach, but they were out there by first base, and they were John and Talk and Story. And Dez, our saxophone player, who could drink Harry Carey under the table at the time, you know, we all got sober, but I mean, Dez was gassed. He was so excited to be in Wrigley on the field, and he saw Yogi Berra, and he looked at me with all the seriousness in the world and said, "This is my only chance to kiss Yogi Berra on the lips." And I'm like, "You cannot, I don't even know what you just said. You can't kiss Yogi Berra on the lips." Because I got to do it. And he started running towards Yogi. And I grabbed him by his Budweiser jacket. And he's like, it was like a cartoon. He's trying to run. And then the events coordinator came up and she said, "Put a leash on your dog or you're not going to sing the anthem." we calmed them down and we sang it.
And that, folks, is the sports segment for this week's Heartland at Home.
Laugh. We normally have one.
I knew you kept Thom around for a reason.
Hey, McGraw, Piranha McGraw. You know, musicians go through ups and downs, particularly rock and roll musicians. And as you know, I've got a couple of kids that toured with bands. And, you know, you're on the verge of making it. You yourself were sponsored by Budweiser, and you almost signed, or maybe you did, with the MCA, I think it was. Tell us about your own ups and downs, the particular path that you were on, and why you ended up going to Hawaii.
Well, first of all, Katie and Hal are extremely talented. Obviously, the James talent genetics skipped a generation because they're fantastic. And they're wonderful. And I wish Twin Peaks. I know Hal's not, Hal's band's not together anymore, but Twin Peaks is still banging it out. I wish him so much luck. It might be harder than ever. You know, when we signed to MCA, they developed. It was the poor. I went from working all the time at the Heartland to having to take the Heartland time off to record demos. And
that's when we fired you.
They cut us. Yeah, that's when you fired me. Yeah, I know.
We didn't fire him.
Never. I would never do that.
I fired myself.
He fired himself.
At that point in my life, I was talking to myself constantly. I just fired myself. But we demoed and demoed and demoed. MCA gave us $2,000 a month to exist on. That's 5 guys to exist on making demos a month. So that's what we did. We demoed. We demoed 22 songs. And then our guarantee was going to be when the album came out, we would get 7 cents on the sale of every album or CD. That's 7 cents. Now that's more than you make now streaming. I mean, Aloe Black sued, I forget what the record company was, but he wrote Wake Me Up that Avicii had 20 million downloads on. Aloe Black got a check for $10,000 for 20 million downloads. He went after the streaming companies and got a big settlement because he's smart and he has guts. But
who's this that you're saying did that? Aloe
Black, a recording artist, a current one, extremely talented, wrote Wake Me Up for Avicii, who had the biggest hit that year with that song. But and Aloe has a great version of it too. But I just said that to say the paradigm's never shifted. I mean, and the band's tour now, and Michael knows this about Twin Peaks. Cade makes most of his money selling merch at the gigs. I mean, that's just what it is. I mean, I don't know what to say about it, except I've been throwing rocks at the moon in this business for 50 years. And I love it. I still making good music, but I've consigned myself to the fact that, you know, my wife Diana is going to be the 6-figure earner consistently in my life, and I'm going to be the guy doing the lawn.
And lucky to have her. You and Diana have been putting quite an effort into your weekly online performances.
Yes.
And so going from what you just said, how does one monetize these gigs? Because as I told you yesterday, I tried to tip you, but they rejected my tip. So I'm gonna go back in there and do it differently. But how do you do that? And I mean, your performances are great. Are we going to try and have a live singing moment here?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do it.
But to answer Katie's
Yeah,
question,
yeah.
we do Venmo and PayPal, and it's nominal. It varies week by week. We don't pander about it. We just post up a little message on the screen for tips. Here's where to go. But it's most. I worked 9 gigs a week in the 7 years I've been married to Diana. I worked 420 gigs a year one year, and I usually work about 390 gigs. I work small clubs and hotels here, but I've worked 42 gigs last year, and they were from March 15th of last year. They were all Facebook shows. So I'm getting a good break. I'm pretending I'm retired. I'm old enough to be, but I'm not used to the idea.
I'm with you on that. I'm with you on that.
Okay,
So-
play us a tune, brother.
Yeah,
we're
got
gonna
it.
do this is the only song that I didn't write for this album. I wrote this song is the last song I wrote in Chicago before I moved here. So I wrote it in 1992, 91. And I just always had a Western because of the town I was in. I moved out of my apartment on 35th Street and moved in with my sister in Justice to consolidate money for the last 2 months I lived there. So I just like the name Justice. So I wrote a song about being wasted in that town, right? Half jacked, half hearted, and I didn't know the street. Grand Lord, don't let me shrink from my task. I couldn't feel the ground below my feet. I was sucking on a bottle of courage from under an overpass, but I know the way. You can make me cry and cry, and what kind of gun does it take to stop your tyranny of tears? I'm in a town called Justice, snow breaks all around. And I know it's just too tough for you to be kind, but I'll never find the silver that's in the ground. Cause I know I got a poacher ahead of me, and he's digging out of my mind, and I know the way. You can make me cry and cry. What kind of gun does it take to stop your tyranny of tears? You better save your trouble for the next man down the road. I have no more room for you in my mind. The clock on the wall of shame is on an overload. I was looking for a vision of hope and just got the needles in my eyes, and I know the way. You can make me cry and cry, and kind of gun does it take to stop your tyranny of tears? I'm half jacked, half hearted. I didn't know the street. Abbreviated version there.
We love that, Michael. And in our time remaining, I want to shift a little bit and have you talk about life on the islands.
Okay.
What's the relationship between Native peoples and the white people, the tourists? What's environmentally going on with, mountains spewing forth? And what's the role of the military, and how's situations in the pandemic? Whatever you'd like to share.
Yeah, choose any one of those, Michael.
I got 60 seconds. Go.
Right.
It's a beautiful place. I mean, people are still very, very kind to each other. We don't have, we simply do not have the racial issues that the metropolitan areas. This is 12th largest city in the country. And we don't have those kind of issues here. aloha is alive, the love is alive here. People are very kind to one another. In some ways, you feel like you're in Micronesia with a McDonald's and a library. You know, it's got a weird balance between a real colloquial settlement place and this big urban techno city. So the main thing is here, you know, the cops aren't as busy as they are everywhere else. That's one thing. So there's a little more peace. There's property crime and stuff, and there's, you know, there's a tweaker problem everywhere on the planet, and it passes through here before it gets to the mainland. So what customs doesn't seize can hit our streets. Our tough spots are Chinatown. That's where a lot of the homeless gravitate to, and it's a wonderful segment of the town, but it's getting flooded now, especially with COVID. Right, we have more homeless than ever anywhere. So that's a little rough right here. But we have a completely democratic city council, okay, on this island. So it's a lot, but it's a lot like the city council we had in 1968 in Chicago that was completely democratic. There's a lot of guys that just men and women that just aren't doing the job. They're so comfortable, right? So the progressive factions here, the Native Hawaiian faction, wants to keep the observatory from being built. That goes back and forth. There's a lot of opinions on that. I won't give mine, but I understand there's a lot of sacred ground here that's trying to get protected, like the Native movements on the mainland. So that's a back and forth thing, but the main thing is it's civil. The exchange here, the discourse here, when people disagree on stuff, it's very civil. And it's one of the reasons I moved here.
Michael Piranha McGraw, how do people find your music and you? Give us a website, an email, whatever, how people find you. Facebook?
Yeah, well, you can tune me in on Facebook on Piranha Brothers Band. And that's, as Harry Carey could not pronounce, Piranha, Piranha. And you can go to that and just subscribe to it or hit like, and you'll have it. And you'll see my weekly broadcasts. They're usually on Friday, Saturday, or Sundays, one of those days, whatever's good for people to watch, you know. And we plan it that way. All my albums, which are Silhouette Artist is Michael Piranha. Diamond Head Road is Michael Piranha. And then the Piranha Brothers Band, Piranha Brothers are The Blinding Speed of Trust and the Lost MCA album. They're all on all the streaming services. Apple, iTunes, Amazon, Spotify, blah, blah, blah. You can even download it on TikTok. So just look for me on any of those streams, Piranha Brothers or Michael Piranha.
Can I just say, I hope the next time I see you, it's in person and on your island.
Well, we got room for more, Hogan, but not James, okay? Like you said in Blazing Saddles, no Irish.
We love you. We love you. Thank you so much for getting up early.
Talk to you later, brother.
Hey, tell Tom Clark I like him in spite of himself, okay?
Great to meet you. In Hawaii.
I get that.
It rains up north this time of year. Windshield wipers dance away, and lovers gather in the storm and speak in whispers of the warm. But me, I'm in the shining sun, boats and barges sailing by. Something's missing, something's wrong. My North Country woman's gone. I'm headed to Victoria, to chestnut hair and laughter. I'm headed to Victoria. Her touch is all I'm after. Yep.
Wow, that was so much fun to see our old friend. Tom, he is a stitch. In case you didn't get that, he will make you laugh forever.
I'm ready to return to Hawaii as soon as I can start that travel thing again.
Exactly. Anyway, Michael Piranha McGraw, look for him. That was his selection, Victoria. To go, new album.
We
Check
just
it out.
want to quickly let you know we have another great musician that Lynn Orman Weiss has come up with for next week. Art Burton, who's with the AACM, a famous avant-garde Southside Chicago jazz group, will be on talking about his history with jazz and Chicago. Will be a great conversation. Art Burton next week.
Later on today is the Network 49 membership meeting that is following up on the values discussion, a really exciting conversation. And that's happening on a Zoom today, Saturday, February 20th, 11 to 1 p.m. And I'm sure the link is on our website. So we want to say, as we have for 25 years, live from the Heartland, and now the pandemically inspired Heartland at Home is broadcast Saturday at our normal time, 9 a.m. On Chicago's WLUW 88.7 FM and streaming live from WLUW.org. Plus, we're posted on youtube.com/Heartland Media and cablecast all week long on CanTV. Whew. Whoa. All right, Tom, what's our closing music?
Well, I think we're going to go out with a little calming Twin Peaks, and hope you enjoy your weekend in the coming week. Please do good in the world.
The world needs all the good we do.
All power to the people.